Welcome back, guys. Tell me what you think of the story so far. We're at chapter 15. I'm going to start reading chapter 15. So, what do you think so far about Leroy and Cheyenne and Prudence, Mr. Willis, all those guys? Let me know in the comments what you think about the story and the characters and what you think will happen. So there are 24 chapters and we're at chapter 15. Okay, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Alright, chapter 15. There's something you should know about Leroy. Cheyenne was not paying any attention. She was searching for the brush and comb. It was Sunday and Maud had invited her to church, which was held on the grounds of the primary school. She was already dressed, but she needed to comb her hair. Maud was getting edgy. She did not like to be late for church. Cheyenne tried never to get on the wrong side of Maud. Have you seen the brush and comb? She stooped to look under the bed for the third time. Cheyenne, there's something you should know about Leroy, Prudence repeated. Really? What's that? She asked absently, turning out the drawers. He has never come on to me. I've sat in front of him dozens of times with absolutely nothing on. He has never once made a move on me. She found the brush, but the comb was still at large. Cheyenne pouted. She brushed her hair together and tied it in a ponytail, glanced once in the mirror, and shouted to Maud that she was coming. Maybe he just doesn't like you that way, she said, on her way out the door. Later, Prue. On Sunday mornings, Maud meant business. She had been making a steady progress towards eternal bliss, and she didn't want anyone stalling her. All the children had been sent to Sunday school when they were younger. As they approached puberty, each one gradually declined. Was there something about starting to grow breasts and having hair on your chest that made you suddenly no longer need the Lord? She didn't force the issue, but all she knew was that for her, church was vital. The cobwebs that had accumulated in her head after 6 days of drudgery and depression were all cleared away on Sunday. There was something in the unity of the congregation, the passion of the sermon, the power of the singing that gave her strength. It was her crutch that helped her through another week. To know that she belonged to something bigger than herself, to know that her tithes went into a wider, deeper pool of love gifts that would go towards the perpetuation of the kingdom, lifted her at least momentarily from the level of serf and made her feel she was making a valuable contribution to something important. And what to do about this child sitting beside her in the pew? Cheyenne had gone straight to sleep almost upon landing. Maud felt she was duty-bound to return the child to God. She had made a vow to her mother, and she somehow felt responsible for Cheyenne's plight. She should never have delivered the child over to that man, albeit he was father, but that didn't save. Maud had thought of calling him and giving him a piece of her mind, which was all he might need to put him back on the straight and narrow when she got through with him. But she always talked herself out of doing so, and she eventually tore up the piece of paper with the phone number that Cheyenne had given her. Then, when she sat down and thought about the situation again, and her anger riled, she decided she would write him a 6-page letter, telling him what was what, and threatening to bring the police in on him too. But this she also deferred. Damn fool probably couldn't read. Illiterate. They were about to sing the recessional hymn. Maud nudged Cheyenne to stand. The girl didn't budge. Teenagers could sure sleep. Maud nudged her again. Shy, wake up, church over. Cheyenne stood giddily and rubbed her eyes. Many people were looking at her and smiling. They liked to see newbies among them, especially pretty ones. It meant their church was growing. A brand new building might need to be erected. They may get a spot on the TV among the evangelical progress you never knew. Pastor came over to shake Maud's hand. She squeezed a little something into his palm, and he accepted with the smoothness of a conjurer. No one saw the transaction. It was a little thing between a shepherd and his sheep, a little bonus for him to keep up the good work. And who is this pretty little thing? He pretended to swoon. Cheyenne was wearing a bright pink chiffon dress that she had borrowed from Prudence. It had organza frills at the seams and hems. Maud had bought the dress on Princess Street for Primrose's graduation. Excellent choice. The dress had been a smash success. She beamed now in pride while Cheyenne received compliments. My little goddaughter, Pastor. Maud almost curtsied. Nice, nice, confirmed the pastor. He patted Cheyenne on the head and moved on to greet the rest of his flock, many of whom he was sure had similar little transactions to make with him, part and parcel of shepherdness. The inspector and his wife were all also bobbing along, meeting and greeting. Like Cheyenne, the inspector had slept through most of the sermon, and his wife had cued him near to the end. It was a little arrangement they had. Teamwork. Everyone was happy. I thought I told you to keep a firm hand and a sharp eye out for this little one, he scolded Maud. He could not shake his air of authority no matter how he tried, not even on Sunday. It's the same way he spoke to his reflection in the mirror. Force of habits. Did you know she had been in the bar the same evening we found the guns? Anything could have happened to her. The matter is in court and we have that place under surveillance. The owner claims to have papers for the guns, but we'll see how that turns out. I already spoke to her about it, Constable. He didn't like to be called Constable in front of his missus. Next thing you know, she would be doing subtle little things to start challenging his status in the household. I gave her a proper talk. You won't see her there again. He shot a stern look at Cheyenne, who cast a timid look at her. Tell Stubbs I'll check in on him in the week. Okay then, Maudie. They bobbed along, shaking hands and stopping to chit-chat. Maud must admit she was relieved to be out of those shoes. She had to soak her feet in warm water every Sunday after church. Her arthritis was giving her something to talk about. The fingers weren't so bad, thank God, because her job depended on her fingers. But her toes and ankles were inflamed. She didn't know how to make it up the hill every morning. The fact that she was overweight wasn't helping the situation. The doctor had said that she should try to shed some pounds, and she knew her constant state of depression wasn't helping either. So heavily in debt, Prudence's tuition to pay, 2 children to send to school, her husband withering away in prison. She could no longer bring herself to visit him. She hadn't visited in years. Prue, come massage my foot, Shug. Prudence fetched the mint balm. It was a Sunday ritual. She applied the pomade and gently massaged it into her mother's feet. It didn't ease the pain much, but the massage was comforting, even if just for the time. Maud fell asleep on the couch. You were saying about Leroy? What were you saying this morning about Leroy? Oh, never mind. Chapter 16. Portmore, the fastest growing city in the English-speaking Caribbean, served as a dormitory for neighboring Kingston and Spanish Town. Most of Portmore's residents worked or went to school elsewhere. They rose in the wee hours of morning, drank tea or coffee, or cereal or porridge, and they left their sunshine city behind and crossed over the bridge to toil and learn. They returned in the evening in crowded buses with tired hearts and feet, and they drew themselves down across the bed immediately after dinner. those who had the strength to prepare and eat dinner and wash up afterwards. That's most of them. A sizable portion of the population stayed put. They lived or worked at or near home, or did absolutely nothing at all at or near home. Their commute, if any, was cut sometimes in quarter, and they had the luxury of leaving home a little latish and arriving home a little earlyish. They had the best of both worlds. The history of Portmore actually went back more than 500 years, when the Tainos settled at Nago Head and along the stretch leading up to the Hellshire Hills. Their relics were found in the countless caverns and cave systems that decked the area, most notably the Two Sisters Caves. But the seeds for modern Portmore were sown in the late 1960s, when a couple thousand prototype housing units were constructed by a private development company as a way of easing the overpopulation of Kingston, which lay just across the harbor. The first such housing scheme was Independence City. Since then, Portmore had grown like a child stuffed daily with Irish mush, till it was so fat that people wondered if it would ever learn how to creep, let alone walk. Instead, it ran from birth. In the end, nearly 40 separate communities lay claim to Portmore. Some were meager squatter settlements that eked out an almost parasitic existence and were snubbed over by the rest. Some were planned and professionally executed and marketed as gated communities with bungalows or townhouses for the elite. These were sealed off and had their own basic amenities, shopping area, solar water heaters, whatever it took to make them feel separate and apart, and to make the cost seem justifiable. But most communities had their humble beginnings as quads, 4 self-contained Siamese units joined at the spine, each with about a quarter-acre out front for future development. Nearly 6,000 housing units had been built, and no one really knew exactly how many people lived there. The flat lands of Portmore merged into the St. Jago Plains, which occupied the bulk of southern St. Catherine. Portmore was cradled by the Hellshire Hills to the west, the Port Henderson Hills, and the Kingston Harbour to the south, and the Caymanas Estate to the east. To the north and northeast lay Spanish Town and the rest of the sprawling parish of St. Catherine. There were 2 main entrances, across the Hunts Bay Causeway Bridge via the Portmore Toll Road along Highway 2000, or along the Nelson Mandela Highway, the latter being the more winding route. Portmore gained municipal status in 2003 and had its own city council and first directly elected mayor. A neonatal pride and patriotism slowly emerged in the residents, to the effect that they began to evaluate themselves and make demands. Their municipality had begun as a fledgling town of mainly reclaimed marshland, semi-desert or barren hillside, to one of the largest and most densely populated towns in the Caribbean, bursting at the seams and proud of the height and weight that it had gained. Portmore had its own essential services. It had schools from the basic through to the tertiary levels. It had health centers, office complexes, laundromats, restaurants, health food stores, and multinational fast food franchises. Portmore had police stations, fire brigades, gas stations, nightclubs, 3 major malls, and countless mini shopping centers. It had a branch of the tax office, Register General's Department office, and a municipal office. The only big thing it really and truly lacked, in the view of some, was a hospital, and they were clamoring for it. The official census ranked the municipality as having almost 200,000 people living there. Some argued that it was closer to 300,000. Not even Portmore knew how many people she had living there, how many outlaws she sheltered, how many other underworldly creatures she gave refuge to. She was an open house who had extended invitations left, right, and center, and she had somehow lost count of her guests, not to mention the guests of her guests. The plain truth was, Portmore was a census taker's nightmare. The population was roving and migratory by nature and could not be pinned down. The massive size of the population was most evident and daunting during evacuation exercises in hurricane season. Bewildering. But even by the most conservative estimates, Portmore was, without a doubt, much larger in size and population than many Caribbean island states who flew their own flags and had their own prime ministers. There were some island nations that could fit 2 or 3 of them neatly side by side into Portmore, with room still left to dance around. So it was an easy leap for the more politically ambitious residents to argue that Portmore should cut itself off from the rest of Jamaica and branch out on its own. It was by no means a popular viewpoint, but a viewpoint nonetheless. Portmore had its attractions as well. People had long been coming to Caymanas Park to watch horse racing and to stake their wagers. People had long been going to Helsha Beach for festival bami and fried fish. Portmore still had its legacy of sugarcane lands that extended to the north and east, though now much reduced. The seasonal burning of the crop and the soot that drifted over into the yards, the ants, scorpions, and centipedes that still reigned in the murky understructure of the schemes in Greater Portmore in particular, reminded residents that one time this was prime sugar territory. Sugar had indeed been king, and cane fields still lined the sidewalk to Bernard Lodge. When the flood rains came in May, September, and October, some of the communities seemed more prone to flooding than others. Portmore had an impressive system of canals, if only they were kept free. The lands that were recaptured from the swamp usually flooded more, prompting the residents to say, "See, the sea always comes back for what is his." People had to wade across massive puddles, which sometimes inched up to their doorways and extended into the streets. Some stepped daintily across and hoped their feet didn't get wet. Some trudged across and couldn't care less if their feet got wet. Fate had hurled the residents together, and while some had run away, most had stayed and more were coming. They sometimes did not get along, and they fought over this and that, but most times they cooperated and saw things through to the finish. Portmore was proud of its sons and daughters, particularly those who had gone on to find fame and fortune and had not forgotten their roots in the humble quads. Portmore had its doctors, lawyers, politicians, and academicians. It had its athletes, musicians, comedians, and artists. In fact, the single largest conglomerate of highly educated people on the island lived in Portmore. The future of the municipality was theirs to determine. Would the Sun City explode into a supernova, then collapse into a white dwarf? Time would tell. Okay. So chapter 16 gave us a wonderful tribute to the city of Portmore. This is where I am right now. I'm in Greater Portmore. I've been living in Greater Portmore for the past 25 years. Right? So, in homage to this great city, we could say chapter 16 was dedicated to Portmore. Okay. Chapter 17. I'll pay you. I have money. Stubbs, don't be ridiculous. I would never do something like that. All you have to do is stand in front of me. I'll do the rest. She was offended, appalled, sympathetic, amused. The fact that he would even think of it. Prudence had thought nothing of going into his room when he called her, though it was the first time she was entering the quad since she had lived there. The room was musty. Stubbs never opened the double window. The most he did was tilt the louvers, and not often enough. There was only the bed, a dresser, a small table, and several huge garbage bags loaded with God he knows. There were 4 high stacks of old newspapers piled about 3 feet high against one wall. The wall that extended to the kitchen leaked whenever it rained, and nothing was kept in that area. Too much trouble to be calling Ferdy to move the stuff. to move the stuff about with each little drizzle. Whenever he needed a particular edition from the newspaper pile, it was Ferdy's job to fetch it. This was often because Indian usually demanded proof for whatever highfalutin claim it was that Stubbs was making, and Stubbs liked to keep his facts at hand. There were at least 8 framed photographs hung on the wall facing the bed, this gallery being the highlight of the room. The paint on the wall was a light turquoise, indicating that at one point the room was mint fresh and that the person who had chosen that color had had happy plans for the room, a child's room maybe, or a study. But the paint was now old and dirty, crusted in places. At Christmas time, when the rest of the house was being scrubbed and repainted, Stubbs' room remained untouched. It was as if he wanted the room to stay still in time, a constant reminder of the happier moments of his life. Most of the photos were of him and Donna, taken during his younger days when he still had legs. Stubbs the entrepreneur, proudly posing with his wife in front of their first apartment complex. Donna the elegant businesswoman cutting the ribbon. Stubbs and Donna on vacation in Antigua, him with a bare belly and Hawaiian shorts, strutting along the beach like it was nobody's business. Stubbs and Donna in their living room in Greater Portmore, entertaining guests, everybody sipping something refreshing. Only 2 of the photos showed Stubbs in his wheelchair. In one photo, he had one leg, the other had just been removed. Stubbs was being wheeled home from the hospital and he was forcing a smile. In the other photo, he had no legs at all. He wore a pair of khaki shorts that covered over the truncated limbs. He was at a very raucous and very unofficial swearing-in ceremony as president of the Citizens Association, an impromptu ceremony organized by his drinking buddies. He was almost unrecognizable when Prudence compared the Stubbs in the photos with the Stubbs in the room. He had grown a beard, which was disheveled. His hair was no better. He sometimes bothered to comb it or asked Freddie to comb it, but most times he couldn't bother and just threw on an old cap if he was going out. His upper body was top-heavy from wheeling the chair around, and he tapered down towards the waist, never to return. Stubbs had thought long and hard about this. He had not acted on impulse. He was a sensible man. He knew the possible repercussions. He had lain in bed countless nights thinking about it, and he was so crazy with desire that it had warped his mind somehow, so that, even though sensible, he had become delusional. He thought not so much of the social or ethical implications, but he thought of it in business terms. He was, after all, a businessman. So it wasn't so much a sexual advance as it was a proposal, a business proposal, demand and supply. He had a need, she could satisfy that need. He was restricted. He would go elsewhere if he could. Nobody would have to know his predicament, the squalor into which his sexuality had sunken. He had money and was willing to pay. Not pay in the sense that one would pay a prostitute, but pay in the way that a customer pays for goods that had been supplied and that met his specifications. He had heard that Prudence undressed in front of men. He did not reason that she would have any grounds to object to what he wanted her to do. In fact, he wanted her to do nothing, absolutely nothing. Just stand in front of me, that's all. Just help out an old man. I need this just this one time. It was certainly not flattering, and she was initially upset. But more than anything else, she felt pity. She did not feel a sense of obligation to him, for what he had done to her family. And this was good because he had not wanted her to feel any. He really was not that kind of man. He had chosen to ask her because he felt she would understand, and because he had heard she had no inhibitions about such things. It was just one little step further from what she already did, he reasoned. If she could let men touch her naked body with their eyes, why not his mouth? Was there any harm in it? Prudence, nothing changes, okay? I asked you a favor and you said no. Nothing changes. I'm a desperate old coot who misses his dear wife. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. Hurricane coming and you children still want to go to the beach? Have mercy. Hurricane not coming till way in the night, Mom. We're coming back before evening. But the water gonna be choppy, don't chance it. Place too hot, Mom, we need a dip. Okay, coming back around 2 o'clock. It was the third hurricane of the season, and it would pass to the north. The other two had veered way to the southwest, and Jamaica, as most often happened, was spared. This one wouldn't be a direct hit, but heavy rains and thunderstorms were forecast. The water wasn't choppy at all. Clear blue skies and a tame azure sea, perfect for swimming, or rather, perfect for teaching Cheyenne how to swim, which seemed to be Leroy's preoccupation these days. Well, you're almost floating. You can graduate to the breaststroke. Just pretend that you're polishing the floors. She tried, but she sank into the watery floor. Leroy grabbed her and held her up. My God, your fingers are soft. They're so thin and delicate. Jeez. You have a fetish for fingers? A fetish? What's that? Leroy chuckled. Never mind. You want to learn to swim or not? Hey, I want to climb on your neck. Carry me out into the sea a little. She climbed up and swung herself playfully around his neck and shoulders. My brothers used to carry their girlfriends this way at the river in Mobay. I always wondered what it felt like. Well, now you know, Shy Shy. Leroy strolled out a few feet into the sea, clinging to her ankles. Her skin was smooth and supple. The nail polish on her toes had all but faded. He was surprised that she wore nail polish and kept her fingernails so long. Shy Shy was slowly coming into herself as a young woman. He smiled to himself. Cheyenne was wearing her two-piece bathing suit. Her wounds had healed without a scar. Her skin was like that. She was happy for it. She held on to the top of his head. Sometimes she stroked his hair and he let her. In his mind, he was helping her through her initiation, making sure she understood that there were positive experiences to be had with men. In her mind, and in the minds of Prudence and everyone else watching, he was falling in love with her. You're really into Miss Shy Shy, aren't you? Don't start again, Prue. I'm still upset with you. Upset with me? I see you're very upset. You and Shy Shy whispering into each other's ears every minute. Leave Shy Shy out of this. She's a child. You're a grown woman. You should act better. He had never spoken to her in this way before. A hurricane was certainly coming. Might be a direct hit after all. What this one name? Asked Gus, their neighbor. Didn't get the name of this one at all, but it coming sure. Someone shouted from their roof. People were busy battening down and hammering away, filling tanks and buckets to the brim, lowering their metal awnings and sealing doors and windows with plastic and duct tape. After that, there was nothing left to do but stay put and wait, and listen to their transistor radios after the electricity went. The storm roared in near to midnight, the heaviest of the downpour and thunderstorm immediately felt. Within the first hour, an entire wall was heard to collapse. Everyone speculated that it must have been the upstairs enclosure that had been recently built and was awaiting a roof, 3 houses down the way. No one was absolutely shocked. Very few masons had a clue what they were doing. I told them the mortar was too thin, said Stubbs in retrospect. He had to ride out the storm in the living room because his room was flooded. Some of the old newspapers had been strewn on the floor to stem the deluge. Stubbs avoided Prudence and Prudence avoided Stubbs. None hated the other, none feared the other. Both had suffered some degree of embarrassment and needed time to recover. The storm raged on. They were for the most part safe. The lowest section of the Hellshire Hills, which extended down to Brayton and Port Henderson, bore the brunt of the storm's surges and sheltered Greater Portmore from the massive floods that swept much of the eastern Portmore communities on the fringe of the lagoon. They in Greater Portmore were mostly prone to runoff from the surrounding hills, clogged drains and poor infiltration. Those were the main culprits that caused their flooding. And with the seasonal flooding would come the crocodiles. Sometimes even the television stations would come to cover the recapture of the poor displaced creatures. There were never any casualties, just some near misses. The crocodiles, if anyone, suffered most from the hands of reckless residents. Their intentions were good, but their methods were suspect. The eye of the hurricane passed by, and there was an eerie calm, a tentative silence that could not be trusted. Prudence sat up in bed and played her guitar. Everyone else had fallen asleep, even Maud, who had been patrolling the rooms like a boarding school matron. After a short lapse, the thunderous winds and rains returned. Prudence could not hear herself play. The deafening riot of the storm drowned out all other sounds, claiming the airways for itself. She put down the guitar, but she could not go to sleep. She thought about Leroy. She hoped he was okay. His sudden attention doted on Cheyenne had triggered the love she had always had for him, the love she had always been scared to express, and he had rejected her. On what grounds, she wasn't sure. By morning, it was safe to venture out and do a preliminary evaluation. Stubbs wheeled himself up and down the pathway so many times he was starting to become a nuisance to people who wanted to go about their cleaning up operations. It was confirmed that the wall had collapsed, poorly constructed. Better now than later. What would have happened if someone had occupied that room? Lucky there had been no roof yet. Maud was in tears. Her precious garden had been decimated. Her babies murdered. That's the thing with hurricanes. They have no compassion. They level the innocent and guilty alike. They make a clean sweep over and trample everything, and they don't say sorry. She would replant. Mrs. Jasper called to say that there had been much damage and that they needed her to come and help out as soon as she could. So she should leave her own house and children and poor trampled flowers and go clean up somebody else's house. Hurricanes and rich people, no compassion. Hurricanes and rich people, no compassion. That's the end of chapter 19. So we'll continue chapter 20